What's up guys, HCZ here, welcome back to Yu-Gi-Oh! Deck of the Day. Today we are updating our hero list because with Amazing Memories release, we finally got the last card that we've been waiting for Heroes, and that's Wake Up Your Elemental Hero. A card that wasn't like super necessary for the deck, but I feel like it does act as an extra layer that we'll be able to pretty much get access to Darklow more consistently. That's what the deck mostly does, but of course it does have some other uses we're going to talk about later, and I felt like that now that the format has changed, we're now in a completely new format compared to what we were with Ishizu tier. It's a good time to update the deck because I've done some pretty major changes because you need to adapt in very different ways now, because before we needed cards that were going to be very crucial for the graveyard disruption, but now we have shifted into more of a generic type of hand trap wise that you need play. So let's talk about the deck and see exactly what changes have become now. So let's start with the monsters. We have some pretty standard stuff, I would say. Let's start with the elemental heroes. We have 3 copies of Stratos. Now sometimes I go back and forth between 2 and 3 copies of Stratos. Now the thing is, whenever Nibiru is a good card in the format, I feel like you have to play 3 Stratos, and the reason for that is because if you activate Nibiru during your opponent's turn, you make your hero lives dead because you have a monster on the field so you cannot activate it, so then it becomes important to hard draw Stratos so you can do your plays and search whatever you're missing. So this is why in this particular format where we pretty much have to play Nibiru because it's such a powerful card against Kashtira, we need to max out Stratos for the more chances of seeing it even if we resolve Nibiru at turn 1. We have 2 copies of Shadow Mist. Again, this is pretty standard. Sometimes you're going to side out one during games 2 and 3, but for game 1, it's pretty important to have the second one because most of the times the first one is going to be search for a mass change, and then afterwards you're going to send the second one to the graveyard with a card like Vion to be able to get another search. So yeah, 2 copies in the main deck, pretty good. 1 copy of Liquid Soldier. Liquid Soldier is an amazing card because it gives you access to basically draw 4 every single duel. You don't really want to use both effects like in the same exact turn by using Polymerization and then using Miracle Fusion because you're going to miss on a draw unless it's super necessary to go for game. But if you're going first, you need to be able to preserve this card in the graveyard after you use it fuse for Polymerization, so the next turn you can use Miracle Fusion to go for Absolute Zero or anything else and then get another draw. So yeah, this card, being able to keep advantage with this card every single turn, it's really important, and it is what separates hero players who actually know exactly how to play the deck from casual hero players. And while we're still on the topic of elemental heroes, I'm going to mention this again. I've been mentioning this in pretty much every hero video that I've made. I don't run Honest Neos. It's a card that I've tested a lot. I don't really like it. I don't feel like it adds anything to the deck that it doesn't already do. It adds damage, which the deck has plenty already. So again, if you're a fan of a card, if you want to play the card, of course, go ahead and play it. Just before you comment down below how good Honest Neos is, I don't think it is. So there's no reason to try to convince me why Honest Neos is good. But again, if you want to play it, then of course go for it. I just don't like it in the deck. Now, moving forward, we have the Destiny Heroes. We have 2 copies of Malicious. This is pretty standard as long as it's a 2, but again, it's a card that I don't feel like it's going to ever go back 3 now because of the next card, because of Denier. So Konami gave us a reason to play only 2 copies of Malicious in Heroes, but it feels like in Heroes we have more than 2 copies, which is why Denier basically fixed the issue of Malicious being a card that was important for Heroes, but a card that was too powerful generically when it was a 3. So yeah, this card fixed a lot. And the card we're talking about, of course, is the 1 copy of Destiny Hero Denier. It's a card that, as long as you can keep reviving with either its own effect or Cross Crusader, you basically have infinite copies of Malicious because you're always going to be able to shuffle one back on the top of your deck and then summon it with the other one from the graveyard. And it's a card that, even though its effect to revive itself is once per duel, the effect to recycle Malicious is not. So again, Cross Crusader is a card that you can use very easily with a card like this to be able to keep getting monsters on the... We have 1 copy of Plasma. I still like Plasma. I feel like it's a card that going second can break a lot of boards, especially, for example, when you try to break a Kashtira board. And let's say that they have locked most of your zones, or if you like impermed or ash something and but you didn't have Nibiru and you have some zones locked, if you're able to summon Plasma and then you take one of their Shangri-La, your zones are going to get unlocked, and then you also have a beat stick on the field that is going to skill drain your opponent. So again, for going second, I feel like Plasma is really good. And going first, in some matchups, there are some matchups that can deal with Plasma very easily, unless you combine it with a card like Destroyer, Phoenix Enforcer, or something like that. If it's just on its own, it doesn't do much. But again, it's a really good board breaking card. It's searchable in so many ways, so I like it in the deck. We have 1 copy of Dark Angel. This card comes in and out of the deck. It depends on the format. I feel like in this particular format it's decent because, again, there are a lot of decks like Kashtira that do rely a lot on the spell cards, like a continuous on the field spell. There are some matchups, of course, that this card is going to be completely useless, for example, like against Labyrinth, but even against these matchups, this card is a Destiny hero, so even if you hard draw it and you don't want to use it, you can sometimes hard summon Enforcer with Polymerization, which has happened a lot, or again, it's a hero, so you can do it with other things like like discarding it for Faris, using it fusion material for your Sunrise. There are so many uses for the card, so even if its effect is not relevant, you can still use it for a lot of stuff. And for the Vision Hero, we have 3 copies of Faris, pretty standard. This card is, I would say it's the best card in the deck. Without this card, the deck could not function, because it's a card that gives you so many extensions. It's a card that gets you access to Polymerization, to Malicious in the Graveyard, to anything you want in your hand by setting Shadow Mist. It's an amazing card. 2 copies of Vion. Being able to use the Vion twice, especially during the grind games, is really important. And even though we do play 1 copy of Increase cycles itself with its own effect, so it's very easy to get this card access. And sometimes you can bait your opponent. For example, if you already have a Vion in hand and you also have Faris, you can bait your opponent in hand dropping your Increase, because you can use the effect to try to summon another Faris, for example, from the deck or something like that, or the second copy of Vion. And then the cool thing is that you can just normal summon your Vion after they have hand dropped your Increase, and they're basically screwed because they've wasted a hand drop and you still get the combo you were aiming for anyways. And 1 copy of Increase. I'm pretty happy that this has become standard. People have been playing like 2 Increase for a very long time, and it was something that I think was keeping the deck back, because even though if you draw this 1 copy of Increase, yes, it does make your Faris play basically much weaker, because you only get like an extender on the field for a hero monster. But the thing is, cards like Increase, you don't want to see them more often, just because you try to make your deck more consistent by having a second copy in the deck. It's like making the combo more consistent, but the deck less consistent, if it makes sense. So yeah, I feel like just playing 1 copy is perfectly fine, because unlike a card like, for example, Darling Tonya Cobra or Gemnite Garnet, if you draw this card, it's not like you cannot play. For the other cards, if you drew them, then cards like Brilliant Fusion and Orpheus Scorpio were dead, and even in those cases, people were still only playing 1 copy of Tonya Cobra and 1 copy of Garnet. So imagine that if a card like Increase is not even as big of a brick as this, why would we play more than 1? So yeah, 1 copy of Increase is perfectly fine. Same theory with Dark Angel. Even if you draw this card, you can still use it for so many different things, because it's a hero monster. And again, it's not like you will never be able to use its effect if you draw it, because you're going to fuse it away, you're going to discard it, and when it's in the graveyard, you can just put it back in your spell and trap zone whenever you take damage, and then you can use its effect. Now let's move on to the hand traps. We have 3 copies of Ash Blossom, pretty standard, I feel like, for a type of generic format that we have right now that is not completely tier 0 like Isizu tier used to be. We can afford to play cards like this, because this card is also good against Kastira, but it can be used in a lot of other matchups like Labyrinth or anything else. So yeah, it's really. We have 3 copies of Nibiru. Now, I'm kinda iffy about Nibiru in Heroes whenever I try to put it in the deck, just because of the fact that I mentioned that if you resolve Nibiru on your opponent's first turn, you make Hero Lives dead, which can sometimes hurt a lot, but the payoff of being able to destroy a Kastira board with just 1 card is just too good not to run in a deck. So this is why I feel like Nibiru is a card that kinda has to be run, and this is a deck that cannot afford to play cards like Sphere Mode, Lava Golem. This is mainly what the trap decks try to do to break boards. This deck doesn't need its normal summon a lot of the times, because unless you have a card drawn like a Fusion Destiny or a Hero Lives, or maybe a Faris with another card, you're going to need your normal summon for a Stratos, a Vion, or anything else. So yeah, it's very difficult not to play. It's very difficult to play without a normal summon. So this is why Nibiru is a better card in this particular deck. It's not without its drawbacks, but it's still very powerful. And we have 3 copies of Imperm. I feel like Imperm is the best hand trap in this format, just because it's a card that you can use against Kastira very easily. For example, like stopping a Unicorn turn 1, but also it can be used against Labyrinth even more consistently than an Ash Blossom, because with Ash you can just maybe hit a Welcome Labyrinth or a big Welcome Labyrinth or maybe a pot, but it's not going to be detrimental. But for example, if your opponent has a Floodgate on board and you set your Impermanence on the same column, maybe sometimes just turning this Floodgate off for like a skill drain or a Gozen match for a single turn is enough for Heroes to push for game, just because of how explosive the deck is. So that's why I feel like Impermanence is a really good card. For the spell cards, we have 3 copies of Fusion Destiny. Nothing to explain about this card. It's a 3, and we're going to play it, of course, because it's this deck's card. It's a card that you can use to do so many things. With just this card, you can get access to pretty much a lot of disruptions. You can get access to Darklaw, you can get access to Enforcer. It's an amazing card. 3 copies of Hero Lives. Even though we do play Nibiru, we still max this card out, because we're not going to draw Nibiru every single game, and this card is a beast of a card, because you can search your max changes, you can summon your Stratos to get your plays. Even if this card gets asked, if you have a second copy in your hand, you can just pay half again and activate it again. So it's a really good card. It's a really good hand trap bait, especially for those that don't really know exactly what to counter when they're playing against Heroes. The deck is not super popular, so it's not like a lot of people know exactly what the deck does. So when they see a card that summons from the deck, then their first instinct is like, good card, Ash Blossom now. So yeah, that happens a lot, and you have a second copy and you can activate it again. We have 3 copies of Mass Chains, another card that I feel like you can kinda cut some copies, especially with Wake Up Your Elemental Hero. You can search it more easily, because you can summon your Shadow Mist from the deck with many more ways. ways than you could before, but again, it's a card that helps you play around hand traps, and in a format where impermanence is popular, being able to activate Mask Change, for example, on a Stratos to summon a Blast to dodge hand traps, or a Vion to summon a Dark Law and dodge an Imperm as well, I feel like it's a really good card going first and going second, being able to dodge hand traps and also break boards, so I still feel like playing 3 is correct. We play 2 copies of Polymerization. This is another thing that I always stand for. It's a card that you have to play 2, I think. If you play only 1 copy of Polymerization, your second copy of Vion is basically a half card that cannot use its full effect in the late game, because you always play 2 Vion regardless, so when you play a card that you can use twice throughout a duel, why you don't use its effect fully throughout a duel? And the thing is, people say like Polymerization is a brick, which is why you don't want to play more than 1. It's really not a brick. It's a card that can sometimes turn weird hands into playable hands. For example, I have summoned Enforcer so many times by hard fusing 2 Destiny Heroes in my hand with Polymerization, and if I didn't have that Polymerization, for example, and I had the Malicious and the Denier in my hand, they were sitting in my hand, they were not able to do anything. So Polymerization is not a brick in Heroes. It's a card that's really, really good. It helps some hands become playable, it helps you play around hand traps, and it's a card that you can search twice throughout a duel with Vion, so you might as well play 2. We play 1 copy of Miracle Fusion. This card, unlike Polymerization, it's a card that requires you to set up first, and then you can use it, which is why we don't really play a second copy, and because we can search it with our Sunrise very easily. But if you need the second copy for the grind game, of course, that's when Wonder Driver comes in, so you can recycle it from the graveyard to be able to use it again. And with Wake Up Your Elemental Hero, we now have even more of a reason to recycle Miracle Fusion. And for the staples of Cav, we have 1 copy of Reinforcement of the Army to being able to search our heroes, and 1 copy of Foolish Burial to send Shadow Mist to the grave to search a hero, or send a Malicious or a Denier, depending on what we need to be able to get more plays in our grave. For the extra deck, let's start with the Destiny Heroes. We have, of course, Destroyer Phoenix Enforcer. This card, it's still a powerful card. People have forgotten how good this card is because Anaconda is now banned, and people don't really see it every single game like they used to. But again, in this particular deck, you can summon it so easily, and it's a card that can give you the grind game on its own. It's a card that can recycle itself every single turn, popping cards, reducing your opponent's attack points, makes Plasma even better because your opponent is not going to be able to normal summon something big and run over Plasma before they do anything. So yeah, this card is absolutely amazing. We play 1 copy of Destiny Hero Dangerous. It's a card that you need for some combos. For example, when you know you're playing in a matchup where Dark Law is the absolute must, and you only have a card like Fusion Destiny, for example, in your hand, you don't have another way to search your Mask Chains. There are some combos you can do because of this particular card to be able to search Liquid Soldier and then normal summon and bring back Shadow Mist and then search Mask Chains this way, so it's another way to get access to Dark. 1 copy of Dystopia. Time has become, I feel like, way more relevant than it used to be like a couple years ago, and pretty much everyone is trying to find a consistent way to put in their deck to be able to win in time, and Heroes do have one, so we might as well play it. This card is not nearly as good as Destroyer Phoenix Enforcer, of course, but if you're going into time, you can use this card to bend your opponent equal to your Denar's attack points, and you can win this way. For the Elemental Heroes, we have 1 copy of Sunrise. This card is amazing. It gets you access to your Miracle Fusion, it destroys cards, and it also boosts your heroes. It's a really powerful card. For the new card, we have the 1 copy of Wake Up Your Elemental Hero. Now, this card, the mainly thing you care about is its last effect, that it says that if it's destroyed, you can special summon a warrior monster from your hand or deck. So you can see the drill here. You destroy your own Wake Up Your Elemental Hero with Enforcer, you summon Shadow Mist from the deck, you get access to your Mask Chains this way. But there are some other niche things you can do with this card, especially during a late game situation where you try to push for game. It does have pretty much a lot going for it, especially if you have a stacked graveyard. So this card, in order to summon it, you need an Elemental Hero Fusion monster and 1+ warrior monster, so you can use as many materials as you want. It gains 300 attack for each fusion material used for its summon, and for any fusion monster used to summon it, it can get basically extra attacks. So the thing is, in a grind game situation where you have resolved like a few Mask Changes, like Polymerizations, Fusion Destinies, and you have a stacked graveyard, if you recycle like a Miracle Fusion with your Wonder Driver, you can activate it to summon this card, and it can have a lot of attack points and potentially attack a lot of the times. And also has another effect that if it battles an opponent's monsters, after damage calc, you can destroy that monster and you inflict damage to your opponent equal to its attack. So it's kind of like a Flame Wingman effect. So yeah, this card, even though it's mainly a facilitator for Shadow Mist, it can still do some cool plays during the late game if you have a graveyard full of heroes, especially fusion monsters. We play 1 copy of Absolute Zero. Again, I'm always a fan of Absolute Zero. It's a card that, because of Liquid Soldier, is so easy to summon. It's so powerful, being able to destroy boards just with a card by linking it away or destroying it yourself with Sunrise or Enforcer. Really good card. 1 copy of Great Tornado. Now, I feel like Great Tornado is not nearly as important as it used to be, because this was the way to counter mainly Flunder, especially Barrier Statue, but now you don't see Flunder anymore that much because Barrier Statue is banned. It's still a decent deck, but it's just not nearly as popular as it used to be. But still, I feel like Great Tornado is a card that you can summon very easily because of Stratos being in the graveyard, and also sometimes you don't really want to summon Absolute Zero, you mainly want to be able to lower your opponent's monsters attack, be able to push for game, because let's say your example has indestructible monsters, or you don't have a good way of going for game after you link away your Absolute Zero. So yeah, this card gives you a beater, it lowers your monster's attack points, and it helps you go for game. Now for the must heroes, we have of course 2 copies of Darklaw. I still feel like you need to play the second copy because sometimes the first one is going to be the one that is going to get, like, for example, Impermed or Droplet, or maybe your opponent has like Dark Ruler, and maybe even Book of Eclipse now is a thing that you can encounter in a deck like this, which can sometimes hurt a lot because, yeah, Book of Eclipse is a card that, even though it has lost some popularity after some other cards became more relevant, but the thing is, people still play it, and Book of Eclipse is a card that is really difficult to counter unless you have Dark Angel on your opponent's side of the field. So yeah, this is why another reason Dark Angel is a really good card, because this deck doesn't have good ways to play around a card like Book of Eclipse. So yeah, your first Darklaw, it's very likely that it's going to get outed, so you need to be able to have the second copy in your extra deck on standby in order to be able to summon it later to either lock your opponent again or go for game, because Mass Chains, most of the times you're using it on dark monsters unless you're trying to play around hand traps on something like Stratos, or maybe if you're playing against Labyrinth, then maybe Blast is better than Darklaw, yeah, but again, the second copy of Darklaw comes up a lot. We play 1 copy of Acid. It's a card that is really powerful, being able to basically Raigeki and Feather Dust your opponent at the same time when you use your Mustang and your Absolute Zero, and with Labyrinth being so popular, a card like Acid, if you catch your opponent without a Heavenly Prison, then you can completely punish them with a card like this, just because of how one-sided it becomes when you try to get all these cards on face down to be able to stall your opponent. But without Heavenly Prison, then this card can be really easy to just destroy your opponent's back row and go for game. And we have 1 copy of Masked Hero Blast. This card is here mainly to dodge hand traps like Imperm on Stratos, but against back row decks, this card can sometimes be better than Acid. The thing about Acid is that if you try to summon it and your opponent, for example, can chain their back row, if you don't use it like during their end phase when they just set their back row, then it can be susceptible to cards like Imperm, Skill Drain. It can eat a lot of things. So the cool thing about Blast, it's a card that is going to consistently try to bounce your opponent's back row. So if your opponent doesn't have like a Skill Drain, but it only have an effect that is going to negate the on-summon effect, like for example like an Imperm, this card is going to apply constant pressure on your opponent, being able to bounce their back row every single turn, and also being able to use your cards more freely because you're going to have to rely on 1 less interruption every single time. So this is why Blast can sometimes be something more than just being the hand trap dodging for your Stratos with Mass Chains. And for the Link monsters, we have 2 copies of Cross Crusader. Amazing card. This card is fantastic with Denier. It's a card that is going to, most of the time, summon Denier back from the graveyard, being able to recycle your Malicious every single time. Sometimes it feels like you're playing like 3, 4, or even 5 copies of Malicious when you recycle your Denier, 1 with its own effect, and then 2 or 3 times with your Cross Crusader. It's absolutely amazing. So yeah, being able to get your Malicious back and also search whatever you need in the process, amazing Link monster. We have 1 copy of Wonder Driver. This card is important now more than ever before because of Miracle Fusion. You don't really want to play a second Miracle Fusion, but Miracle Fusion in the grind game with Wake Up Your Elemental Hero can give you an insane amount of pressure. So a card like Wonder Driver, being able to recycle a card you don't want to play more than 1 because it can be a brick, is really crucial, and can also be used for combos like I mentioned with Dangerous to be able to search Mass Chains, so it has that going for it as well. And we have 1 copy of Dread Decimator. Now the reason we are playing Dread Decimator is because some people are playing D-Barrier to be able to counter Castira, and if you're playing against D-Barrier, you know that Heroes are a fusion-based deck, so it can be sometimes difficult to play under it. But if you have your Cross Crusader ready in the extra deck, there are some plays that you can use, for example, going for Plasma, or going for your Cross Crusader, or not your Cross Crusader and going into your Dread Decimator, that can help you go into game even without fusing, which is weird for a deck like this, but it can happen because you can special summon a lot of monsters with your Vision Heroes, you normal summon your Stratos, maybe you special summon one when Hero leaves, you get your Plasma on board, you try to destroy your opponent's board with it, and then boost all your monsters with Decimator that it points to be able to go for game even under D-Barrier. So this is why this card is crucial for formats that D-Barrier is a relevant card. So yep, that's the deck, guys. I feel like Heroes are much better now than they used to be in the previous format. That's weird to say because you would expect that a card like Darklaw was going to be able to destroy Shizu Tier, but unfortunately that was not the case. So I feel like in a format that is more toned down than the last one, right now Heroes can thrive a bit better, and with the last piece of support that we were expecting being now out in Maze of Memories, we have all the tools we need to be able to make the deck as good as possible and also be able to do well in a format like this. So yep, that's the deck, guys. If you enjoyed it, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss upcoming content, and we'll see you next time.